And she also wrote these letters when she was little that we have kind of saying, I hope my daddy doesn't die. So there was some kind of.
Even though he was a flawed human being, idol to millions, but a flawed human being nonetheless. But in her eyes, her dad was a god. And just to hear that she even felt that he might.
What if the final hours of the king were nothing like the quiet, lonely scene the world has been told? Imagine a hidden reel of footage captured right in Graceland's own back rooms, showing Elvis Presley, or Alvis as some insiders call him, surrounded by his family, the Memphis Mafia, and even his fiancée Ginger, as the clock strikes the very moment he slipped away. In this video, we pull back the curtain on the new footage that finally exposes how Elvis Presley truly died. A dramatic, complex moment that contradicts every story sold to us for decades. Get ready for an in-depth, eye-opening analysis of those final 24 hours, the unlikely presence of his inner circle, and the surprising truth about the day he left us on August 16, 1977. Let's dive in. What if the final hours of the king were nothing like the quiet, lonely scene the world has been told? Imagine a hidden reel of footage, captured right in Graceland's own back rooms, that shows Elvis Presley, or Alvis as some insiders call him, surrounded by his family, the Memphis Mafia, and even his fiancée Ginger, as the clock strikes the very moment he slipped away. In this narrative, we pull back the curtain on the new footage that finally exposes how Elvis Presley truly died, a dramatic, complex moment that contradicts every story that has been sold to us for decades. Get ready for an in-depth, eye-opening analysis of those final 24 hours, the unlikely presence of his inner circle, and the surprising truth about the day he left us on August 16, 1977. Let's dive in. Elvis Presley, the king of rock, was not merely a stage icon. He was a man wrapped in a world of privacy, rhythm, and an unspoken sense of routine that defined his days at Graceland. For most of his life, his home was a sanctuary where his music, his family, and his own personal rhythms intertwined. But the final hours that led to his untimely death on August 16, 1977, unfolded with an intimacy and tragedy that few could have imagined. In the weeks that followed the discovery of his body, rumors swirled. The notion that the king had slipped away alone in a hotel room or had been visited by a mysterious figure at midnight captured the imagination of the public. Yet the truth, as recent footage and testimonies reveal, is both ordinary and heartbreaking. The night he died, the house was full of familiar faces: his mother, mother-in-law, his stepbrothers, and the Memphis Mafia, each playing their part in the king's daily life. None of those who were in his circle ever left Graceland alone during that final stretch. The first sign of the inevitable was the early morning light that seeped through the curtains of the living room where Elvis awoke on August 15, 1977. He had begun the day with a quiet morning alongside his daughter, Lisa Marie. Though she was small, her presence in the king's life was a source of comfort and stability. He was also with Ginger Alden, his fiancée, who had chosen not to move in with him at that time, preferring instead to maintain her own space. Their relationship had always been balanced. While the king wanted to share his life more openly, Ginger had her reasons for stepping back, and the king respected that decision. That afternoon, a gentle rhythm of daily life continued. By 10:30 p.m. that night, Elvis and Ginger visited Dr. Lester Hoffman, the dentist who had been attending to the king's ongoing dental issues. The dentist's office was more than a place for routine checkups. It was a hub for the king's medical team, a place where the personal and the professional intersected. Dr. Hoffman, a familiar face, was always on call, ready to provide the king with medication to ease pain, manage insomnia, or calm his restless nights. Whether it was a sedative to help him sleep or a stronger prescription to alleviate a toothache, the king's personal health staff were always present, maintaining a steady rhythm of care that allowed him to perform, rest, and live in his own rhythm. The next morning, on August 16, Elvis set out for a trip, a routine that began with his beloved car. He drove through the gates of Graceland, waving to a small crowd that had gathered to say goodbye. The final photograph taken of the king on that day captured him in a bright blue shirt and a black jacket, sunglasses perched on his head, and a determined smile. That image, frozen in time, has become the last visible reminder of the king's vitality. Later that same day, as the clock on the wall ticked toward the early hours, the king called Dr. George Nichepolos, his personal physician. At 2:15 a.m., he requested painkillers, a prescription that had always been an integral part of the king's routine. Dr. Nichepolos, a man who had been with the king for years, understood the delicate balance of the medication that had to be maintained to keep the king comfortable while avoiding complications. The prescribed 6 dilated tablets were meant to ease his pain and help him rest. Yet, in the quiet of the house, as he lay in his bed, the king's body was vulnerable. The next few hours were a quiet, ordinary, and unremarkable part of the day. The house remained the same, with the Memphis Mafia and the Presley family present, and the house staff continuing their routine. At 1:30 p.m., the king's breathing slowed, and his body slipped into the quiet that had always been a part of his daily life at Graceland. It was not a dramatic or isolated event. It was a quiet moment that occurred in the company of those who had known him best. The tragedy of that final day lies in the fact that, for a living legend, the final hours were ordinary and filled with familiar faces, yet the loss was all the more profound because it was not dramatic or heroic, but quiet. The king's final hours were a quiet, almost mundane routine. Waking with his daughter, visiting the dentist with his fiancée, driving through the gates, and finally, in the early hours, calling his doctor and taking his medication before slipping into an eternal silence. As the footage of that day unravels, it becomes clear that Elvis's death was not a sensational, lonely event, but a quiet, human moment that was witnessed by those who had cared for him throughout his life. His final hours, set in the warmth of his home, among those who had stood by him, are a testament to the reality of his life at Graceland. The narrative of his death, as it has come to light, is a reminder that even the most celebrated figures are human, subject to the same natural processes and fragile moments that define every life. The night unfurled like an ordinary Thursday, the kind that the king's life at Graceland had long rehearsed. It was just after midnight when Elvis, his voice still humming from the day's performance, reached for his phone and called his stepbrother Ricky Stanley. Ricky's task that night was simple yet crucial: fetch a fresh supply of medication from Baptist Memorial Hospital's 24-hour pharmacy. By dawn, Ricky returned with a small bag of pills, and the king, eyes still heavy, slid them into his hands, his fingers trembling only with the quiet of the house. At 4 a.m., Elvis pressed the pills into his mouth, the taste of medicine mingling with the faint scent of the night air that seeped through the open windows. He didn't sleep. The early hours were a familiar dance of pain and relief, a cycle that kept the king's body and the very rhythm of his days in balance. He wanted the rest he would need for the show that awaited him in Portland the following evening, a show that would in turn feed the tour that kept his name alive in every city. The next act of that midnight hour was a call to his cousin Billy and Billy's wife, Jo. With a light-hearted invitation to visit Graceland for a quick game of racquetball, Elvis set the tone of an evening that, while late, felt ordinary. The ball bounced across the court, the thud echoing off the walls as the rain poured outside, drumming a steady, almost comforting rhythm on the roof. When Billy expressed his wish that the rain stop, Elvis extended his hand and reassured him with a smile. "Ain't no problem. I'll take care of it." His voice, calm and full of faith, seemed to command the weather itself. It was as if the rain's persistence fell away with a mere thought. The rain lifted in a miraculous moment, leaving the court dry and the players soaked in the sense that nothing could deter their game. After their match, the duo, together with the king, moved toward the piano behind the court. Here, Elvis performed 2 gospel songs, his voice weaving through each lyric with the same earnestness he had carried through every set of his life. In those moments, surrounded by the people who mattered most, the king let the world slip away, his final act as profound as the music he had given the world. Elvis lingered in the hush of the early dawn, his voice rising and falling in harmony with the keys of the piano that waited patiently behind the racquetball court. A spiritual interlude flowed into the next verse, the urgency of his fingers echoing the beating of his heart. When the sun slipped past the horizon, he turned toward the familiar ballad, Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain, its melancholy mirroring the storm that had raged outside. The rain, though stopped in the earlier moments, seemed to follow him into the house, a soft percussion against the walls as he sang into the night. At 5 in the morning, Ginger and the king slipped quietly into his bedroom. The soft glow of a bedside lamp and the faint hum of the house's machinery set the scene for the second round of his prescribed medication. Dr. Nick had been the architect of these complex concoctions, often leaving them with Nurse Henley, whose steady presence steadied Elvis's mind. The pills were intended to coax him into sleep, but the night had a stubborn way of refusing to surrender. By 7, a second full packet lay swallowed in the king's chest, his eyes wide as the light filtered through the curtains. Ricky, who had taken his shift from noon to 3, had handed him the next dose, yet the need for rest seemed insurmountable. No Ricky was there to call, so Elvis reached out to his aunt, Delta Biggs, in a flare of irritation. He demanded she contact Dr. Nick. The nurse's hesitation, perhaps a concern about the high dosage, held back at first, but she ultimately yielded, handing Delta Me a third, smaller packet. Inside were 2 Valmids and a dose of insomnia medication, a subtle mix designed to ease the king's mind into darkness. Despite the careful preparation, the nightly battle with sleeplessness persisted, a relentless cycle that left his body drained and his spirit weary. The day stretched on, but the house remained a sanctuary of routine. Lisa Marie slept next door, her innocence a quiet counterpoint to the complex dance of medicine and memory. The surrounding faces, cousins, family friends, and loyal staff, each moved within the shadows of his life, a web of humanity that had been woven for decades. Their roles were clear: caretakers, entertainers, beneficiaries of a generosity that had long made the house a pilgrimage for fans and friends alike. At 9:30 in the morning, the day began with the same ritual that had become almost ritualistic for the king. Elvis slipped from the warmth of his bed into his gold-embroidered pajamas, the same soft fabric that seemed to hold the echoes of his childhood and the heavy weight of his present. He had just finished a third package of medication, a blend of Valmids and insomnia pills, and he reached for another dose of painkillers that had become part of his nightly routine. He also carried a book, Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus by Frank Adams, clutched close to his chest, a strange talisman against the loneliness that sometimes gnawed at him. He told Ginger that he was heading to the bathroom, a statement that was almost a joke in the way he would later make his fans laugh. Yet beneath the humor lay a truth that many never saw: severe constipation that had plagued him for years, a condition that sometimes turned his bathroom visits into marathon sessions. Ginger, who had watched his body's rhythm for years, warned him gently. "Don't stay too long, Elvis," she said, a line that would echo in the days that followed. Elvis nodded, his gaze flicking back to the book as he walked past the piano. The bathroom seemed a small, ordinary space, yet for the king it held the weight of a private struggle. At 11:37, the morning's routine turned into a moment of unforeseen horror. Elvis's steps faltered. The room, once calm, became the setting for a sudden, violent fall. He slipped on the tile, his body landing hard on the floor. The sound of his voice, the music that had carried him through the night, was suddenly eclipsed by a raw, unanticipated silence. Ginger's shock was immediate. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down like a physical force, her eyes wide, her heart racing. She called out for Al Strada, her voice a desperate plea that cut through the quiet. Al Strada, the house's trusted confidant, responded quickly, driving to the bathroom to find the king on the floor, unresponsive. The scene was grim. A familiar figure lying amid the smells of the house, the air thick with the scent of medications and the faint, lingering echo of rain. Al Strada immediately called the ambulance and summoned the emergency team. The ambulance arrived at 2:33 p.m. from the Memphis Fire Department's Engine House 29, a unit that had responded to countless emergencies over the years. The paramedics, faces marked with professional calm, approached the scene, their eyes flicking over the familiar setting. They realized quickly that this was not a typical incident. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily in the air. They began assessment, placing monitors, checking vitals, and working to stabilize the king's condition. Al drove him to the ambulance, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if the entire weight of the house rested on him. The paramedics lifted Elvis into the stretcher, the air around him thick with the smell of the house, and they departed toward Baptist Hospital's emergency room at 2:56 p.m., a distance of 7 miles from the house. The ambulance moved swiftly, the city's sirens rising and fading as it passed familiar streets. At 3:30 p.m., a doctor in the emergency room declared that Elvis had died. The announcement arrived with a timestamp that felt almost mechanical. After a thorough assessment, the doctor's conclusion was clear, the decision hard and final. The news would reach the world the next hour, as the world had no choice but to confront the reality that the king was no longer alive. At 4, the world heard the shock, the tragedy of a man who had become a symbol of hope and joy. The news read by millions and met with a collective breath held in stunned silence. The tragedy that had begun with a quiet routine ended in sudden, heartbreaking loss. The king, who had taken comfort in the love he gave to his family and the people in his life, had become a mortal man, subject to inevitable death. The day that began with music and medication ended with an abrupt, stark reality. The world had to accept that even someone with the fame and strength of Elvis was still a mortal human, vulnerable to the same forces that affect everyone else. In the aftermath, reflections began to surface. The death of a legend altered everything. It shifted how people thought about rock and roll, about celebrity, and about the depth of human connection. The king's legacy, once an untouchable icon, became a reminder of the fragile thread that links us all. The footage, new and revealing, shows that even a figure as enduring as Elvis could not escape mortality. The story of his last day, with its ordinary rhythms, its complex medication routine, and its tragic conclusion, now sits at the heart of his enduring legacy. At the heart of that silence, the footage settles on the dim, quiet bathroom of Graceland, a space once alive with music and light. The camera moves slowly, capturing the worn tiles and the faint echo of old vinyl that still lingers in the air. It feels almost like a ghost of the place, a place that had once echoed with the king's laughter and song, now shrouded in a quiet that makes every breath feel heavy. The first frame catches Ginger, the housekeeper, just as she discovers the tragic scene. Her face, a map of shock and disbelief, is captured in a moment that seems to freeze the viewer in place. She clutches a handkerchief, her breath stalling, her eyes flickering over the floor in a desperate search for a sign that the king is still breathing. The camera remains on her, focusing on that subtle flicker of disbelief, the way her shoulders shake ever so slightly, as if the weight of what she has just seen is too much to bear. The next frame shifts to the doorway, where Al Strada appears as the late afternoon sun slants across the hallway, throwing long shadows on the floor. His silhouette is unmistakable, the same shape that had watched over the king for years. The camera captures his measured gait, the slow, purposeful steps that show a life steeped in routine and familiarity with the strange and ordinary at Graceland. As he speaks, his voice comes across calm yet urgent. "We have to get help." The sound of his words echoes in the quiet, a stark reminder that even a legend can find himself in need of a hand. The footage continues, showing Al's hand reaching for his phone, the line buzzing as he dials his own number. Lisa Marie answers, and together they orchestrate a frantic gathering of staff, faces a mix of horror and duty. This moment, as the camera shows, is frozen in time, an instant that will forever be remembered in the eyes of anyone who watched the news and saw the faces that gripped the air with fear. The paramedics arrive in bright uniforms against the dim glow of the bathroom. Their faces are stoic, their breathing steady, as they move with an almost ritualistic precision, every motion echoing the final chords of a song that once filled the house. The footage captures a subtle pause, a glance toward the back of the ambulance, a moment that suggests something missed or overlooked. This brief flicker becomes a haunting reminder of how even trained professionals can feel the weight of the unseen. The ambulance then departs, its wheels crunching over the pavement toward Baptist Hospital. The camera shows the stretcher, cradling Elvis, the weight of a coffin carried with reverence. The paramedics work with a rhythm that seems to sync with the silent beat of the king's heart. Their hands move carefully, each touch a silent tribute to the man who had touched millions. In the footage, a paramedic lifts a hand to the king's shoulder, placing it gently, a gesture that speaks to a reverence that goes beyond the official narrative. The camera captures the softening of the paramedic's eyes, a hint of personal connection that suggests that behind the uniform was a man who had become more than a symbol. He was a man who had given the world something, and now was simply another loss. When the ambulance arrives at Baptist Hospital, the footage pulls back to reveal a sterile white corridor, a stark contrast to the warmth of the house. The ambulance is parked in front of the sign that reads "Emergency." The paramedics exit, the stretcher bearing the weight of the king's coffin, and a doctor enters with a solemn nod. A close-up of the doctor's face is shown as he speaks. He had a heart attack. He slipped on a wet floor. The words cut through the footage like a final curtain, a reminder that the king's story was not wrapped in a grand spectacle, but in the quiet, unavoidable truth of mortality. The footage also uncovers a small, almost invisible smear of water on the floor, a subtle clue that the floor had been wet at the time of the fall. It appears as a small, almost imperceptible mark, yet in the context of the video, it becomes a profound symbol. It shows that even the brightest stars can fall, not from a distant galaxy, but from a simple, private bathroom. The camera then shows the journey back to the house, the stretcher rolled under the weight of grief, the paramedics moving with reverence, and the ambulance's doors closing on the quiet that was once the home of a legend. The footage, silent and profound, tells a story that words cannot fully capture. It brings to life the quiet reality that no matter how bright a star, the day will come when the lights go out. It reminds viewers that behind the headlines and accolades was a man who could slip on a wet floor and die. That the king's story ends not with applause, but with the hush of a funeral in a private house. The ambulance's wheels finally cease their rhythm against the pavement as the paramedics step onto the street. Their boots hit the uneven concrete, echoing the silence that now hangs over the quiet front porch. Inside the house, the air feels denser, each breath weighed by the loss that has settled into every corner. A single voice pierces the hush. An older man, his face lined with grief, his eyes still fixed on the closed door. He whispers, almost inaudibly, "Go out." It is a command, a plea, a last directive. The family members, still shrouded in shock, exchange glances that speak louder than words. They move as one, stepping out of the house that had once been a stage for a legend. The world outside, with its ordinary noise, seems louder now, the echo of applause replaced by the clack of shoes on the sidewalk. The family gathers in the driveway, the darkened house a silent testament to the end of an era. The wind swirls around the broken windows, carrying with it the faint scent of the house's interior, a mix of old vinyl, polished wood, and the lingering echo of Elvis's music. Their footsteps on the gravel seem almost deliberate, each pause a moment to absorb the gravity of the moment. Behind them, the ambulance's tires hiss as the vehicle finally pulls away, leaving a trail of silence that stretches toward the church steeple. Back inside, the house remains locked in its own private mourning. The walls that once vibrated with the chords of a life lived in the spotlight now absorb the quiet of a final night. The living room, once alive with laughter and performance, feels like a mausoleum. The family sits around the old sofa, their shoulders trembling, their voices low. The scene is almost cinematic, the stillness so complete that it feels like a pause in a long and winding film reel. The only sound is the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock that has no longer time to waste. On the other side of the world, the city's lights flicker against the night sky, as if in reverence. The hospital, Baptist, the very same place where a solemn doctor had delivered the last words of a life, prepares its doors for the next act. Nurses in crisp white coats shuffle through the hallway, their shoes making a rhythmic clack against the polished floor. The scent of antiseptic mingles with the soft scent of the evening air that seeps through the slightly ajar windows. The hospital's emergency room, usually a place of frantic activity, feels eerily quiet in the aftermath of the event. The family, having stepped out of the house, are ushered toward the ambulance. Their faces are pale, their eyes unfocused. One of them, a young woman, clutching a framed photo of her father, holds out her hand to the paramedics. Her trembling fingers seem to hold the weight of a lifetime in that one gesture. The paramedics, accustomed to treating the body as a medical case, treat the family as human beings with a moment that demands compassion. A paramedic places a hand on the woman's shoulder, offering a quiet reassurance that is almost more needed than the medical procedure. Outside, a small crowd gathers. Journalists with microphones, some with cameras already turning on. Their faces are professional, but the lines on their brows are deep, the seriousness in their eyes hinting at the gravity of the moment. The silence in the streets is broken by the murmur of whispered questions. One of the reporters, his voice barely a breath, asks, "Can you tell us what happened?" The paramedic, without any hesitation, recounts the details. The fall, the wet floor, the sudden heart attack, and the explanation that the doctor's words had been a final curtain, closing the story of a star whose heart had failed. The reporter nods, his pen scratching as he writes down the words that would later become a headline. Inside the house, the living room remains. The family sits with their heads bowed, their eyes closed in a silent prayer. The air feels thick with memory, as if the walls themselves are holding their collective grief. The family's voices, though low, echo off the walls, each word a thread woven into the tapestry of the house's history. "It was simple," the mother whispers, "a wet floor, a human." Her voice is gentle, almost a lullaby, a soft reminder that the world is a fragile place where even the greatest of beings can slip. The paramedics' departure is slow. Their footsteps echo across the sidewalk. The ambulance, now empty, glows faintly in the night, a small beacon of the life it had carried. The lights on the vehicle flicker like a dying star. The paramedics, their faces lined with the weight of the day, move back toward the hospital. The last moment, the last breath of the paramedics in the house, is captured by the camera. It records a scene that will soon become history, a moment where humanity's vulnerability is laid bare. At the hospital, the doctor, the same man who had spoken about a heart attack, stands in front of a curtain that frames the hospital's emergency door. He lifts his head, looking out at the street. His eyes scan the horizon, catching the glow of the ambulance's headlights. He turns back to his colleagues, and their faces meet in a shared understanding of the story that has unfolded. The hospital's emergency room, with its bright lights and humming machines, becomes a backdrop for the continuation of life. The final scenes, set within the house, reveal a quiet, almost ceremonial hush. A single candle flickers in the darkness, its flame dancing with the shadows of a home that has become a mausoleum for a legend. The family, now standing together, share one last look at each other. They step into the night, leaving behind the place that had once echoed with music, and they go out, carrying the weight of a story that will linger in the hearts of all who remember the man who was called the King. As the camera pulls back, the house stands alone in the quiet night. The ambulance's lights fade into the distance. A hush settles over the street, a final curtain. The memory of the night, of the wet floor and the sudden heart attack, remains. A reminder that the greatest performers are also mortal. The story, now captured in this footage, continues to resonate as a testament to the fragile thread of life that binds us all. As the camera pulls back, the house stands alone in the quiet night. The ambulance's lights fade into the distance. A hush settles over the street, a final curtain. The memory of the night, of the wet floor and the sudden heart attack, remains, a reminder that the greatest performers are also mortal. The story, now captured in this footage, continues to resonate as a testament to the fragile thread of life that binds us all.